Before we get into this mysterious report, let's clear something up. Skeptics and debunkers believe this story might be a hoax, to no fault of their own, since they lacked a single piece of evidence prior to 1959, but Daily Strange News now has that evidence. The prior claim was that the earliest report of this story originated from Frank Edwards' 1959 book called Stranger Than Fiction, in which Edwards devoted 3 pages to the story. Frank Edwards was the George Norrie or Art Bell of his time, and just like them, he had his own radio show with a large following besides him writing numerous books. It should be noted that he was not prone to over-sensationalism, and there are no accounts of him outright fabricating a tale. Daily Strange News has located dozens of old news reports from the 1930s describing this incident, which also contain images, and so obviously Frank Edwards couldn't have made up this story. The following was compiled from several sources, the earliest being from November 25, 1930, and includes many newspaper sources from that time period, as well as separate investigations. The story now begins. A Canadian fur trapper by the name of Joe LaBelle beached his canoe on the edge of Lake Anjikuni, 100 yards or so in distance to a village, and let out a yell of a greeting as he walked up, but there was no answer. Then 2 half-starved husky dogs crawled towards him from the distance. They did not snarl or bark, as huskies do with strangers. They crept up, whinnying dolefully. As LaBelle approached, he saw the bodies of 7 dead huskies were laying around. LaBelle tensed. He had the instincts of a seasoned outdoorsman, and he could sense that something was seriously amiss. LaBelle stated that everything was deathly silent, and not a single tent had smoke coming out of it. The veteran tracker, having spent so much of his life traveling around inaccessible forests, was not likely easily spooked, but it's difficult to imagine that he was not bathed in cold sweat as he walked past the derelict, wave-battered kayaks into the heart of the caribou skin tent village, wondering what had happened to its inhabitants. LaBelle said, "I'll admit that when I went into the first tent, I was a little jumpy, since I expected to find corpses inside." LaBelle methodically pulled back the caribou skin flaps and checked all the shacks, hoping to find telltale signs of a mass exodus. But much to his chagrin, he discovered that all the huts were void of their owners. Oddly, the tents were still stocked with hides, boots, deer parkas, clothing, cooking utensils, iron pots, even rifles, which is the most prized possession of any Inuit. In one shelter, he found a pot of stewed caribou that had grown moldy, and a parka that lay discarded on a bunk with a bone needle still embedded in it, as if someone had deserted their effort in mid-stitch. Nowhere were there signs of any struggle or pandemonium, and LaBelle knew all too well that deserting a perfectly habitable community without rifles, supplies, their parkas, or dogs would be utterly unthinkable, no matter what the circumstances might have been to force the tribe to spontaneously migrate. LaBelle said, quote, "The whole thing looked as if it had just been left that way, by people who expected to come back, but they just didn't come back. I went looking over the entire village. I tell you, I was puzzled. I figured there had been at least 25 people that lived in that village. The 2 skeleton-like dogs strolled behind me as I searched the village, but found all the tents in a similar state, with guns and clothing left behind. I tried to find out where the Eskimos had gone to. They hadn't moved to a new territory, or they would have taken their equipment, especially their guns and their dogs. Then I thought of the Eskimos' evil spirit, Tornar, who has an ugly man's face with 2 long tusks sticking up from each side of its nose. The natives live in fear of Tornar, and they wear charms to ward him off. I got the creeps when I saw one of the tents ripped to ribbons, and another rifle left behind, though I suspected it was from the wind. It really bothered me seeing rifles left behind. The last thing an Eskimo ever parts with is his rifle. I went down to search around the lake to see if somehow the whole village had drowned or committed suicide, but this seemed very unlikely. What I found was even more puzzling. It was an Eskimo grave built of stones, but it had been opened and it was empty. I had no way of telling when it had been opened, or what had happened to the body that it had once contained, and I couldn't figure out why it would be desecrated. I stayed all afternoon trying to figure things out. There was no sign of a struggle and everything looked peaceful, but the air seemed deadly. I caught a few fish and gave them to the 2 dogs and then moved on. I didn't want to spend the night there. End quote. It's worth noting that each tribal group in the region believes in a beast that roams the area, but the name Tornark is not common and appears to be used by the local Inuits. The closest match for a similar beast, though not an exact match based on its appearance and its actions, would probably be the Wendigo of the north. The Wendigo is known to be both human-like and animal-like, almost akin to that of a werewolf-like being, but is known for famine and starvation among other things. Continuing with the story, during the season LaBelle visited a dozen or more Inuit villages, but in none of them could he find anyone who knew anything of the deserted village. Most of the Eskimos, when told about it, blamed Tornark and let it go at that. Officers of the Northwest Mounted Police tried to trace the lost tribe but were equally puzzled. They say that the tribe may have perished in a blizzard while off on a caribou hunt, although admitting that it is unlikely that all the women and children would have gone along. Pestilence occasionally strikes Eskimo villages, but in that case there would have been bodies. One clue came to light during the 1930s search by the Mounted Police, but it hasn't lessened the puzzle. A tribe living 150 miles north of the abandoned village has an adopted 10-year-old Eskimo boy who seems to have wandered into the village a few months earlier and who doesn't belong to any of the nearby villages. The boy and the tribe were reticent about things, and nobody learned anything from them. At the end of all the reports from the 1930s, the reports stated that the police are doing their best to unravel the mystery, and they may succeed, but on the other hand they stated that the Arctic is full of mysteries. So was the 10-year-old boy the sole survivor of some type of attack? And if so, why won't the boy or anyone else in the surrounding area speak about it? There are other more modern stories about this case that are even stranger, but since they appear they could be fabricated, they were left out of this report. As if this case weren't strange enough, this incident has unusual similarities to a case that occurred in 1959 and will be discussed in part 2 of this video news report. Until then, you be the judge if otherworldly forces were involved or if there was a more physical earthly cause. Remember to subscribe to this channel for free and tune in tomorrow for more daily strange news. Don't forget to support our sponsors. Take care and God bless.